We're in Myrtle Beach at an Italian restaurant, but our focus is on Japan. Meet somebody who's going to bring them all together. Coming up next on Carolina People. Good morning. Welcome to Carolina People. This morning we're at Villa Romana, Italian restaurant, the Italian restaurant of the year, between 7th and 8th Avenue South on Kings Highway in Myrtle Beach. We're focused on teaching abroad, and we're visiting with a former English teacher in Japan, Tiffany Jackson. Good morning, Tiffany.
Good morning, Greg. Thanks for having me.
Thanks so much for coming in early on a Tuesday morning.
No problem. I'm glad to be here.
How long have you been back in the States, Tiffany?
Let's see, I had my 10-year high school reunion on the 11th of August, and I came back 2 days before that, so August 8th.
Right, so just about 2 months, a little more than 2.5 months now.
Yes, still technically in reverse culture shock mode. Yes.
I bet. You were over there continuously for, is it more than a couple of years?
For 3 years. The contracts run a year concurrently, so
Right.
3 years total, and I managed to come home once for Christmas.
Is
much
that
to my
right?
grandma's delight. Yeah.
Oh, yeah, just one time in 3 years.
You actually get a fair amount of vacation time, but you're situated so well in Southeast Asia that it's difficult not to jaunt off to India or Thailand, you know, whenever you get a break.
Oh,
So.
yeah, yeah. How did you actually get over there the first time? And, of course, we'll talk a little bit about yourself in just a minute, but this was a program sponsored, I think you said, by the Japanese government?
It is, and there's a little bit of backstory to that. When I was a junior in high school, my father worked for a Toyota car dealership,
Right.
and they were trying to give scholarships to some employees' children, about 20 across the nation, to go to Japan for a summer exchange program.
Right.
So I applied and luckily was awarded a scholarship. So I spent about 2 months living there in Nagoya, which is about the 3rd or 4th largest city now.
In Japan, Nagoya.
So while I was there, I went to school with my host sister, and I basically just wrote letters all day. I mean, I didn't really know what was going on.
Well, English letters. I mean, you just
To my family and
just
friends
sitting
back
there.
home,
yeah,
right?
Yeah, right.
But at the time, there was a woman there teaching English who didn't speak so much Japanese, and I remember I would walk around and see her in the grocery store, and I thought, how brave that she lives in this huge city and is kind of oblivious to what's going on around her, but
right.
still what a cultural experience. So I always kept that in the back of my mind. And,
Right.
and then as I was in university, I researched the JET program, which is Japan Exchange and Teaching.
Oh, good.
And it was actually the program she was on, but you have to have a university degree. So I put it off for a few years and
Right.
finally got around to applying and actually getting over there in July of 2004.
That's tremendous. Well, of course, your connection here is you actually grew up in this area.
Oh, right. So I was born at Conway Hospital and was grown up in Myrtle Beach and actually graduated from Socastee High School.
Socastee High School. I think I saw for a little while you were on the mock trial team, even traveled around, competed.
That's right. Socastee does pretty well at a lot of extracurricular activities. Go Braves. And we made it to nationals quite a few years. We were state champions quite a bit. So went to Pittsburgh, Johnstown, all over competing in competitions.
That's tremendous. That's
It
tremendous.
was lots of fun for sure, and I think it gave me a good analytical edge, the older I got. Continued
Later,
on into university doing that.
matriculated to the USC Honors College, I believe?
That's correct.
Tremendous, yeah. What were you studying up there?
All kinds of stuff.
Ooh, yeah.
So,
Big smile there, yeah.
it was kind of a little bit early to decide a career path, I think, when I graduated.
18, 17.
So I started out as an English major.
Right.
Then I went on to newspaper, print journalism.
Good, yeah.
And then
our show sponsor here,
Right.
the Myrtle Beach Herald, great, yeah.
And it ended up doing electronic journalism, which is kind of radio and television production.
Sure.
Yeah, and
Did you do any work up there in Columbia, or have any involvement with any radio or TV stations up there?
I did, and actually the senior practicum program is something called Carolina News, which is a cable news show that's produced every day by students that are seniors in the journalism program. So that was my introduction to television, and we got to produce, direct, anchor, all sorts of things. And after that, I did a little work for the primary elections for South Carolina Educational Radio.
Great.
Subsequently got an internship at ETV, and I have a really strong, warm feeling about their mission over at Educational Television, Educational Radio. So I was happy when they took me on part-time while I was in university, and then actually worked my way up from programmer to director to producer eventually.
Right, now this phrase, in university, similar to in the UK, is it the same phraseology in Japan, for instance, as opposed to saying I was in college or I was at USC or Carolina, whatever folks around here from Sac-a-Steve would say? I mean, in university, is that the phraseology there in Japan?
Is that a bit odd? I didn't even...
Oh, well yeah, potentially, yes.
Actually, they say uni.
Is that right?
So they truncate it down to, they're pretty good at slang words and taking English and making it their own.
Yeah.
So it takes a lot of concentration for me not to use words like uni. At uni, you know.
Golly, certain aspects of Japan you have trouble, as you say, just getting out of your blood. I mean, there's things that'll be with you forever.
It's very true. And one of the things that was most striking when I came back to the States, and I went to a restaurant and I ordered food, I couldn't believe the portion size. I'm like, this is enough for 3 people. Oh, my goodness.
Yeah.
Some things like that have, of course, stuck with me. Some of the words. I say daijoubu a lot, which means, like, are you okay? Are you all right?
Really? Yeah.
And it just slips out before
Your family here knows what you're saying, or they just look at you, blank stare?
My father gave me a lot of grief at first for going, as like some sort of affirmative, like I'm listening to you.
Yeah.
Something akin to a
That's wild.
Yeah.
That's fascinating. What was that mission of the ETV there in Colombia that really struck you? You said you were drawn by the mission of ETV.
I remember the first time that I ran across an ETV program when I was a starving college student and didn't have cable and some bunny ears, and was just fascinated by the documentary style and the educational nature of the programming. And so I started tuning in more and more, and I think they've got a catchphrase that really sums it up: stay curious. I think I'm pretty inquisitive on the whole, and I love it when I tune in there, and it's everything from historical facts to local and current events, and I'm a current events junkie.
Are you really?
Yeah. So I appreciate what they do there.
That's great, Tiffany. Well, you know, as you think about obviously studying journalism and getting active, even in broadcast or radio, broadcast television or radio there in Colombia, have you contemplated that? As you said, entering university, 18, 19, tough making a decision there, what you want to do for the rest of your life. Now, a few years later, you may have some idea. Are you thinking about journalism possibly as a career? Or are you still trying to make that decision? Yeah.
A few years later, I would say I'm borderline more confused than ever.
Ooh, wow.
Which, you know, after going and experiencing something like living abroad for 3 years in a place that's so radically different from what you're used to.
Yeah, I want to talk about that.
It really opens up the world and a lot of opportunities in a way that, you know, things that may have been scary before or may have seemed insurmountable. Well, now I've got this, perhaps it's a confidence that I didn't necessarily have before that makes me think I could just pack up and move to Brazil.
Really?
And make it happen. And it might not be too...
Yeah, that's exciting.
But I regularly look online for jobs at public radio stations, Seattle, Austin, Texas.
Good for you, yes. Good places to be.
Still swirling around in there.
Right. What about, are there lots of Americans in Japan? Is it being overtaken by Americans?
Quite the contrary. That was one of the more startling aspects when I first arrived. I can remember stepping off of the Shinkansen, which is the bullet train. And
is it really a bullet train? I mean, it's quick.
Yes, it is.
Faster than our metros.
I wish I could give you some numbers, but I can't.
It's quick.
Yes.
Yeah.
You know, and I was in Tokyo Station, which is one of the largest in the country, and I just sat there mouth agape, like turning in a circle, and I realized I was the only non-Asian that I could see. At that moment, I was sitting there with my bag, and I was really overwhelmed because I've never been a minority in that significant of a way. Luckily, growing up in my generation, being a woman is not the handicap that it once was, perhaps, right?
Early part of the last century, yeah.
So, you know, and in the big cities, Tokyo, Osaka, Nagoya, there are more foreigners. But overall in the country, according to the Bureau of Statistics in Japan, it's 0.91% of people residing there are non-Japanese. So
less than 1% are non-Japanese?
Yeah, and of that fraction of a percent, actually 3/4 are of Asian descent, which is Korean and Chinese mostly.
Right.
Who reside there. So actually seeing Caucasians is a rarity. The farther you get from the big city, you know, the more rare that becomes. And I lived quite a ways out of the big city. So.
And how many folks are in Japan? How large is that? How large is the country? Not to put you on the spot.
Are you putting me on the spot here?
Go to the Bureau of Statistics. I mean, come on.
Let's see. There are 14 million in Tokyo. I don't have a clue.
It's a big old.
About the country.
Yeah. I mean, it's a lot of folks. You said 14 million in Tokyo.
Well, that's cited so frequently because of the actual population density there. I mean, it's such a small place, and you just put them in high rises and pack them in there, and so that's probably why I've heard that one over and over again.
Now, were you actually teaching in Tokyo? You were in one of the others. I think you wrote it out here. Niigata
Prefecture.
Prefecture means what?
It's akin to a state.
Okay, great,
It's
good.
a political department. And actually, Niigata is on the west coast, almost directly across from Tokyo. So it's kind of a straight shot, about 2 hours and 15 minutes on the bullet train.
And the bullet train connects those two?
Well, there are a few transfers here and there.
Stop-offs, yeah.
Right. I can get as far as Nagano, which is actually a fairly well-known city. I think the '96 Winter Olympics were held there. And that's about 45 minutes from where I lived. So I'd have to take a local train from there home.
Yeah. You know, when you think about when you first arrived there 3+ years ago, Tiffany, versus when you were leaving, were there any changes that really stood out in the country itself? I mean, not even thinking about what it was like for you as an American arriving there, clearly being part of a very tiny minority, but what about changes in that country? Anything just systemically that you recognize?
I mean, there was definitely a political shift from Koizumi to Shinzo Abe, which is something that I was fairly well acquainted with, keeping up as best I could. And
not many of our viewers know what you're talking about. I'm sorry, excuse me. These are prime ministers.
Sorry.
Okay, yeah.
So the political climate shifted quite a bit while I was there, which is something that I didn't have any direct contact with, but enjoyed overhearing other folks discuss, although politics is not a big coffee discussion for Japanese people in general.
Really? I wonder why.
They're very conservative and tend to be, unified in a lot of opinions. They have a phrase called kuki o yomu, which means to read the air.
To read the air.
So they don't really have to discuss. Everyone just kind of acts in accord because they've read it on the air.
Right.
So there's not much dissenting opinion that's tossed around lightly in the country.
And some of the stark differences between the Eastern world there and our Western world, as many folks call it, what are some of the big differences? I wanted to ask about just that form of government for viewers who may not be familiar exactly with the form of government, but what are some of the big differences? That phrase you just used, what was that again?
Kuki o yomu. To read the air.
To read the air. That's fascinating. How about some of the big differences between Japan and, of course, we want to talk a little bit about teaching and what that was like, since our focus is on teaching abroad. But
it's so interesting, too, to go there, and it's just, absolutely different than anything I've grown up with or experienced before. So there's great focus on family there.
Really?
The family unit is incredibly strong, and they're incredibly loyal to their family. Kids don't just up and move away to Japan for 3 years and leave their parents back home. Right. It was interesting you asked about a shift. While I was there, I had an older female friend who was probably the best non-native English speaker I met during my time there. And she had a son who married. Traditionally, the first son marries, and the wife moves into the family home. So she then begins to care for the in-laws, as well as holding down a full-time job, caring for the children, cooking all the meals. It's quite a role to play.
And caring for a poor husband, yes.
Oh, right.
Let alone everything else, yeah.
And so I saw a shift in this, that my friend's son had a talk with her and said, we don't want to live together. We want to get our own place. And it was quite heartbreaking for her. And she's fairly progressive in her thinking. Like I said, she's a good English speaker. And so that was an interesting tipping point, I think.